So good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this afternoon's CAPLA Spring 2021 lecture. And I don't really think I need to introduce myself, but I'll introduce myself as part of the School of Architecture Events Committee. My name is Beth Weinstein. I chair the committee along with faculty members Susanna Dickinson, Oscar Lopez, Teresa Rosano, and student members Nick Altamura, Jasmine Guzman, Alfredo Quezada, and Amy Yang. And the CAPLA AIA talk series includes events sponsored by both the AIA of Southern Arizona and the two schools comprising CAPLA or the College of Architecture, Planning, and Landscape Architecture at the University of Arizona. The University of Arizona occupies and is built on the original homelands of indigenous peoples who stewarded this land since time immemorial. And we are honored to work on the traditional lands of the Tohono O'odham Nation and the Pascua Yaqui tribe. And on behalf of the College of Architecture, Planning, and Landscape Architecture, I pay my respects to these communities and their elders, past and present. In aligning with the University of Arizona's core values of a diverse and inclusive community, we recognize and acknowledge the people, culture, and history that make up our community. And at an institutional level, we are proactively working to broaden awareness throughout campus to ensure that students, staff, faculty, and guests feel and are represented and valued. So while we continue to be unable to be shoulder to shoulder in lecture halls and exhibition spaces, and then hopefully not for too much longer, we continue to gather creative and critical thinkers and makers from nearby as well as far away to share their thoughts and work with our spatially distributed community wherever they may find themselves. So before I pass over the microphone to my colleague, Laura Holmgreen, who will introduce our speaker, I want to let you know about a couple of upcoming events. At 4:30 on March 12th, WIAS, Women in Architecture Society, is hosting a Women in Architecture panel with seven local design professionals, including Robin Schambach of BWS Architects, Tatiana Bressler of Elgin and Bressler, artist Marcy Ellis, Kathy Hancock of HK Associates, Estela Sayada or Celaya of Celaya Soloway Interiors, and Teresa Rosano of Ibarra Rosano Architects, as well as Claudia Capel-Joy of Concept Lighting Lab. The latter two, of course, are members of the CAPLA faculty. On March 17th at noon, the School of Architecture, the School of Landscape Architecture and Planning invites Richard Johnson, who holds a BS in Civil Engineering and Master of Urban and Environmental Planning, to present a lightning talk and discussion titled Welcome to the Age of Climate Action. Please also mark your calendars for the ARCC 2021 conference, April 7th through 10th on performative environments. And the keynote speakers will be A.L. Weissman of Goldsmith University in Forensic Architecture, based in London, Peggy Deemer of Yale University and co-author of the 2020 book, Architecture and Labor, and last, Michelle Addington, who's the Dean of the School of Architecture at UT Austin and co-author of Smart Materials and Technologies for the Architecture and Design Professions. So as always, you can find more information about these events, their speakers, and links to register at capla.arizona.edu under the News and Events menu. So I'm now going to turn it over to Laura to introduce our speaker this evening.
Thank you, Beth. Well, it's really my pleasure and an honor to introduce my colleague and friend, Altaf engineer. I'm going to ask you for a minute to cast your minds back to the fall of 2017. That is when Altaf arrived to join our faculty, along with some others you've heard in the lecture series this year, Jonathan Bean, Christy Currens, also Lad Keith beginning a new role that year. It was also a time when I returned to the School of Architecture after 8 years at another institution. And I want to tell you how fun it was to meet these new colleagues as I was returning to the U of A, and to have a chance to see it through their eyes as I was trying to get to know it again myself as it had changed over the years. I've really appreciated their energy and enthusiasm, their expertise. It's truly been a wonderful experience to work with them the past few years. So I pay tribute to that to all my colleagues who joined us that year. So Altaf is an assistant professor in the School of Architecture. He also has an appointment at the U of A Institute on Place, Wellbeing, and Performance. And with that joint appointment, it will make sense to you that he is the faculty advisor for a concentration within the Master of Science in Architecture program. He advises students who are studying in the health and built environment concentration. And I believe there are a number of students here who are in his current elective or one of his electives on health and the built environment. Altaf came to us from the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, where he received his PhD in architecture and earlier his Master of Architecture. He really had a storied time there. He was an Illinois Distinguished Fellow for a number of years, and he also received the ARCC King Merit Medal for excellence in architectural and environmental behavior research. So that's the same ARCC, which will be holding its conference with us in April. And I want you to know that that medal is quite an accolade. It's a very important recognition of research achievement. Altaf was raised in India. He earned his Bachelor of Architecture from the University of Mumbai and is a registered architect in the state of New York in the US. So something that intrigued me when I first got to know Altaf is that building on his dissertation research, he co-authored a book. Indeed, he was the first author on a book entitled Shedding New Light on Art Museum Additions. So continuing his interest in daylighting, lighting more generally. And the subtitle is interesting too. It's Front Stage and Backstage Experiences. So the experience of those who come to art museums to view the art and those who work with the art and do other things backstage. He's also the founder or co-founder of a nonprofit global design practice entitled Architects for Society. And so design professionals work together and they've developed an award-winning housing prototype entitled the Hex House, or called the Hex House, for displaced populations. And that was a few years ago in 2016. And Altaf is now most recently contributing to 2 of the new option areas in the P3 curriculum in the B-Arc. And so I think that's allowing all of us to enter into some new conversations and to draw on his expertise. So he'll be talking today about the transformational impact of health-related research on real-world lives, real-world outcomes, architecture, architectural practice, and education. So I look forward to hearing Altaf's lecture, and thank you all for coming.
Thank you so much, Laura. Great introduction, and it's been a pleasure getting to know you and working with you as well as all my colleagues at UA and Kappa, many of whom are on this call. So thank you for being here. I'm gonna go ahead and share the screen. So Laura already mentioned, you can see the screen, right? Okay, okay, good. Yeah, I didn't want to go through the lecture without showing anything. So Laura already mentioned the what I'm going to talk about, and here's the title of my lecture. I'm going to be exploring the synergies between research, education, and practice in the field that I work in. That's health in the built environment, um, and just talk about its impact on research, curriculum, policy, and practice. So, as architects, we are often told that we are in a very interdisciplinary profession. The work we do, just bridges across many disciplines just by its very nature. But I don't think I understood what that really meant before I joined the UA and took up my position, which is a joint appointment between the School of Architecture and the Institute on Place, Wellbeing, and Performance, founded by Dr. Esther Sternberg, who's also over here attending. So the Institute on Place, Wellbeing, and Performance, just to give you a little background, is a bridge between the Andrew Weil Center for Integrative Medicine, the College of Medicine, and CAPLA. So it's the main bridge between these. But for every project, we actually connect a lot of other units across the UA. And I'll be presenting a few such projects today that uh, do this in different ways, and again explore new synergies and create an impact in the field in many different ways. So my position by its very nature is interdisciplinary. I didn't have to try very hard to be multidisciplinary or make it happen really, but I did have to make it happen by doing the work that I'm going to be talking about. So my research consists mostly about on a big focus on daylight and lighting in general, but getting into the health and behavioral aspects of daylighting. And I teach a class by the same name, Daylighting Health and Behavior. The social and behavioral issues in design. In the recent years, I've gotten into studying Indo Air Quality. And as part of all these areas, learning new technologies to measure human performance in the built environment in different ways. And most recently, since last year, getting into COVID-19 research and design outcomes in the field. As far as the curriculum goes, I launched the Health and Built Environment subplan, which is now a concentration in the Masters of Science and Architecture degree program, developed related coursework in that. I also teach building technology class to undergraduates. I'm part of two exciting new P3 groups in the undergraduate curriculum. One is on light, and the other one is on critical practices. And many of the students, I believe, are also in this meeting, so good to see them. As far as impact on practice and policy goes, um, I've been involved in work with federal agencies, nonprofit organizations, and a number of different industry partnerships. Um, Throughout the lecture, I will touch more or less on all of these aspects of my work, some more in detail and some touch very briefly. But feel free to ask me more at the end in the Q&A session. The health and built environment curriculum came out of the AIA Design and Health Consortium leadership group 6 evidence-based approach to health, which consisted of environmental quality, natural systems, physical activity, sensory environments, safety, and social connectedness. This group is really critical in bridging research and practice. In fact, it was launched with the goal of bridging research and practice in architecture in different ways. And we were founding members of that group. And that happened before I came in. So Dr. Sternberg, Alethea, Director Rob Miller, and many others were involved in that effort and getting us to be founding members of that group. The core coursework as a result of that um, consists of, as I said, classes on health and well-being, social behavioral factors, and the research project at the end, which is a thesis research of the Masters of Science students that usually goes on for a couple of semesters, often extends into one or two more. And typically it's a 3-semester long graduate degree program. And the goal, again, of this program is to arm degree candidates with knowledge and skills to go out in the field and have a real world impact on health and the built environment. They learn how to conduct and translate research into practice, which is also one of my big goals throughout my research agenda. So, and I have spent many years in the field, 2 in India and about 6 in the US at different design firms. So I do have some insight on the limitations, real world outcomes, and how, what are the efficient and key ways to make these connections. And I'm going to talk more about that via the projects. All the work in health and built environment that I focus on is based on largely on the fact that we spend more than 92% of our times in an enclosed environment in the US. And this comes from a survey from data collected between the years 1992 and 1994. So long time ago. And one can only assume it's much more now. Of course, during the pandemic, could be close to 100%. But even pre-pandemic in the recent years, it's safe to assume that it's much more than that. And you may have heard of this fact very often in different presentations, but I just wanted to point out that it comes from a survey that's not very recent, that goes way back, and it could be even much more now. So the built environment has a really strong influence on our health and well-being in many ways, because we spend most of our lives inside it, right? So even if you're an outdoorsy person, hopefully you sleep inside in a built environment at night. And I believe most of you probably work inside a built environment. So it really adds up to a lot and causes strong influence on your physiology and psychology. The title of this talk comes from a recent conference paper presented at the ARCC 2020. This happened only in November because it was largely delayed due to the pandemic. But this research was done pre-pandemic times. And I was interested in finding out how these research processes were disseminated. Well, first of all, how in practice different design firms conducted this research, and number two, how they actually documented it and disseminated it in different ways. So traditionally, even though health-related design research has been carried out mostly in research settings or academic settings, there have been a lot of initiatives, such as the one launched by the Design and Health Research Consortium, which tries to push the research also in practice, in professional practice, and create these connections. So there's significant change in the recent years in the conventional roles of architects, and there are many more human-centric research programs, and then as well as education initiatives at architecture firms on a global scale. And every design firm has its own variation of these different research design methods, processes, and outcomes. But no one has studied it before, or not in much detail as to how they're actually documented, or as to what extent they're actually documented and disseminated in different ways. So it was very interesting because when I presented this paper, another colleague presented a paper on how the research that we do is invisible to design practices in different ways. So I followed up by presenting how the research processes that firms undertake are invisible to us in academia, or maybe invisible to us and not making sufficient impact in that process. So my research questions were, what are the different ways in which this research is documented and disseminated? Are they effective? What are their influences, outcomes, and limitations? And what are the gaps in that documentation as to what's missing, how could it be potentially improved, and what we could do to change that? My hypothesis was that these processes were in fact invisible to educators and researchers, or largely invisible, and therefore they are limited in their influence in the field in design and health. They're not very effective in the way they're documented or disseminated. And then actually gathering information on that um, was done in an exploratory way, because I wasn't sure how to approach that in the beginning exactly, but it ended up being a web search as well as library search across different databases for research. So first was the first search for a sample of these firms involved in design and health. And the next step was actually searching for work that was documented by them in different ways. And the methodology consisted of content analysis of these documents. So what exactly were the themes? What exactly were the frequencies of different keywords related to design and health research in the work that was published in different ways? And a number of recurring themes related to health and well-being emerged from these themes and keywords that I found. Um, some of them related to the research in health and built environment. But of course, the proposed design solutions dominated um, the themes by and as you can see there, about 47% of the search results. And then there was an awareness or discussion of human-centric issues in many different ways across the results. Firms also talked about environmental issues, human health issues, specific skill sets, technology, and particular research methods in health and the built environment. So this showed us that the research does exist. They do conduct research. They do document them in different ways. Uh, we are just not as aware of them as we should be, or it just doesn't get noticed as much as it should. And then how they disseminated the work again was spread across blogs, newsletters, design magazines, news releases, scholarly articles, but again, dominated by the project galleries, obviously on the websites, because that's the main means of advertising or showing their work to new potential clients. And then it's also interesting to see the various themes across these documents. So sustainable goals, design innovation, and there were a number of scholarly articles on health and wellness, indoor environmental quality, and then testimonials on the websites by clients and other people who had worked with them on there. But of course, all of this information was pre-COVID. So I'm going to talk about what I want to do next in the research. But in conclusion, for that study, I just want to say many firms miss opportunities to disseminate knowledge. There's severe limitations in cost, time, and required expertise. There's also certain cultural or practical challenges, as many in the conference told me. It was an international conference, so there were many scholars from Europe. And they said, well, there's also cultural challenges in implementing this kind of research. We just don't do it. It's not the culture over here, et cetera, et cetera. So to counter these limitations, I uh, propose a simple 5-step model that consists of a review of literature in the field, evaluating pre-design, pre-occupancy conditions in different ways. And I'll give some examples of that through a couple of projects later in the presentation. Applying the research findings, post-occupancy evaluations, which have been fairly common in the last few decades, and then dissemination of the work very effectively, which I also consider really essential as part of that research process. Again, the study has limitations. A larger study is needed. Um, there should be probably surveys and interviews of design and practice leaders, which would reveal some more qualitative information, give us some more insight on these processes. At the same time, of course, it is nice to objectively just review what's out there and document that and present the results. There were also some technical limitations. Some were, some themes couldn't be tagged or collected effectively, and then they were unavailable also for a proper review. So a larger sample size is also needed. Of course, there's probably thousands of design firms involved in design and health, in the field of design and health. So this sample captures really very few of those design firms. But of course, the work involved in studying these processes and their documentation is enormous. So collecting that data and analyzing it is not that easy either. So the next steps in this study for me is to do a post-pandemic analysis. And obviously, I expected to find an uptick in the activity in the health and wellness area, and the results already point towards that. So while there's still fewer projects, I believe that's because those are in progress, and we'll see them develop soon, and we'll see them being documented soon. But there's already a lot more research. There's more news releases, conferences, field magazines, reports, newsletters, blogs, social media, um, put out by design firms and talking about health and well-being over the last year. So it's not surprising to see so much more activity in the field during COVID-19 times. And then, so I want to increase the sample size, and then in the end, just do the same analysis and do a comparison of pre and post. I believe that's really valuable information for us, and for also the consortium in figuring out where the gaps are and how to bridge those gaps. So how do you measure health and well-being? I mean, that was one of the first um, things I learned after getting to the UA and the Institute on Place, Wellbeing and Performance. For me, before that was probably just going to the doctor's office and getting different measurements and things checked. I mean, that's how I knew that health was measured. Um, and there was a real learning curve about the different technologies that are now available, and using them very effectively to measure physiology, human physiology, and psychological aspects that go towards health and well-being. And I started off with probably the biggest project I've been involved in so far, conducted by the Intelligence Advanced Research Projects Activity, IARPA, under the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, which wanted to measure human performance outcomes in the intelligence community in different ways, and do this in an unobtrusive manner. As you can see on the right, this project was the result of a partnership between Lockheed Martin's Advanced Neurosciences Lab and then our Institute on Place, Wellbeing and Performance, led by Dr. Sternberg, Dr. Matthias Mail from psychology, uh, myself representing the built environment aspects of the project, and a team of postdoctoral associates, Erika Baranski, Alex Danvers, Casey Lindberg, and Alison Tackman. So there was a lot of work in getting this information together and measuring office workers in different ways. The site for measuring these was at the Lockheed Martin campus in Sunnyvale, California, which is a big spread out campus with a number of Lockheed buildings. The main building, however, was number 157, which housed about 300 plus office workers. And all these office workers were given wearable devices of different types that measure different aspects of human physiology, such as heart rate variability, sleep, their activity, their posture, etc. Then we also used environmental sensors that measure temperature, humidity, carbon dioxide. Um, there were cell phones with an application developed by Dr. Matthias Mail in psychology that recorded speech. So social interactions, which are also key to well-being, as I mentioned earlier, were also recorded in different ways. Everything was encrypted, and so privacy was always maintained. And these conversations were never heard by anybody because the app just converts it to data that just can be measured, but it's not like in any human language anymore. So that this study was key to understanding how these different technologies could come together to measure health and well-being and performance, human performance in office workers in different ways. Interestingly, the building, when it was built, was also known for its daylighting and productivity studies. And this is something that I found out later through an article that was published in 1995. But apparently, the year in which it was constructed, Lockheed saved almost $500,000 in energy bills just by the daylighting features of that alone. So there's a giant atrium in the center, and there are light shelves near all the windows that bounce natural light back into the space that workers are, and which benefits them tremendously in different ways. So it was a great choice and a great site to conduct this study. This study wrapped up a year ago, and there were 3 phases, and the findings of that are still under publication. But really, one of the key findings were about how these devices work and how they talk to each other and how we can use them in different office settings. Laura did mention my book, so I'll step back a little bit to my time before the UA when I was very into daylighting studies for my PhD dissertation, and I went into a number of different museum environments to study lighting levels for art conservation, for occupant comfort in the front stage public areas, as well as the offices in which they work, and also the qualitative experience of being in a museum and the experience of looking at the art in these natural light settings. 2 of these museums are the biggest museums in the United States. The Met is 2 million square feet, so uh, larger than some of the airport terminals that we have today. The Art Institute is 1 million square feet. These museums span many blocks. And then 2 are smaller museums. One is the Phoenix Art Museum and the well-known Nelson Atkins Museum in Kansas City by Stephen Hall, very well known for its daylighting and lighting features. Um, the field work took a lot of time because of how big 2 of these museums were, but they're also all over the country. But also the fact that they have a bunch of different additions that I have mentioned here. So there's a main museum building always, but there's a number of different additions, and all of them look very different. One of the key findings of this research was the presence of glare. So I found that the lighting levels for art conservations were fine. For art conservation was absolutely okay. I mean, there was no cause for concern. And that's because curators of these museums really give priority to that aspect of art viewership. And also these pieces are extremely valuable. And the last thing they want is for them to degrade in direct daylight. So it was great for art, but not always the human experience. As you can see in some of these photographs, there are big sunlight patches on the floor or on different surfaces, and they create a lot of glare and contrasting environments. And these environments create a lot of human discomfort. So it's good to have the natural light, especially in big museums when there's a lot of museum fatigue and it's hard to walk around and look at art for so many hours. And it sometimes takes a few days to look at each and every piece. So it's great to have that, but there's a lot of discomfort in these glare conditions in different areas of the museum. So that was one of the key findings that I also shared with the museums. And there's also the book that's published, which uh, museum officials and curators have available. But my work on daylighting now continues through the research and curriculum, and working with students. So this is an example of the work done by Ryan Schindler, who was the first MSArc HP graduate from the program. And Ryan was also interested in a lot of the daylighting work that I had done, and he was interested in measuring human factors along with the daylighting aspects of the space. For this, he needed a lot of funding, and we helped him secure one of the biggest scholarships in the AIA for students, which is the healthcare scholarship, uh, due to which he could afford a lot of these wearable devices. These wearable devices can be tremendously expensive. Each piece costs many hundreds of dollars. And through the scholarship, Ryan could get 15 of these, which was good enough for his master's thesis and could be used in rotation um, across many residents in an assisted living facility in Tucson. So it was a real world project, which in many ways was also serving the community, because Ryan worked directly with the owner of this assisted living facility to study um outcomes of lighting and daylighting conditions. This particular wearable device measures different spectrums of light and activity and sleep. So we can combine those together and study how different types of light, the RGB spectrum, affects sleep activity, which are essential to the well-being of people in assisted living facilities. And again, it was a great partnership because he could share these outcomes with uh, with the assisted living facility, and they got great design recommendations for daylighting and renovations or redesign in different ways. So part of this was also conducting computer simulations of the different room configurations that you see again in the previous slide. So there's lots of different room configurations. Some get more daylight than the other ones, and some are easier to redesign and uh, you know rethink in different ways than the others. Another example is the work of a former student, Tasbi Alaktum, who graduated last year from the MSR Design and Energy Conservation. And I'm now presenting a paper with Tasbi in the upcoming ARCC conference in April that we are hosting at CAPLA. And that is again on glare, just studying daylighting glare in different ways. In this case, Tasbi went into the UA library and studied a reading room space and assessed and measured glare in different ways. So it's uh, it's easy to recognize glare conditions, but it's really hard to measure it and assess it, and then come up with recommendations to mitigate it. There's nowhere in the building code where there's really a mention of how glare should be controlled, how you should design for that. They're designed for shade, they're designed for heat, for thermal aspects, but there's nothing much for glare. However, there's plenty of previous research studies on glare, but then each one seems to adopt a different approach. And none of them are easy to implement in practice. They involve a lot of different steps. They're very complex. There's a lot of back and forth and comparisons. Um, so really the goal of this study was to find a simplified way through computer simulations of measuring glare conditions and then presenting design outcomes based on that information. So I look forward to presenting that at the upcoming ARCC conference. So switching to Indo Air Quality. And again, this is a fairly recent area of my research that I've been getting into. We already know that um, the environment indoors in enclosed spaces, like I said, we spend more than 90% of our time in these spaces. And we already know that these environments are 2 to 5 times more polluted than the outside, right? And many of us may be feeling the effects of that over the last year of just being inside for a long time. So yeah, you should step out for that walk, to be in nature when you can, or especially for those of us in locations not impacted by a snowstorm at this point. So, um, and understanding and controlling these pollutants can greatly help in reducing the risk of health concerns. So, a lot of health concerns can be measured, and we can mitigate that in effective ways over time. And there are also findings about things that have not been measured by building systems or required by building code to be measured, such as carbon dioxide. But we know from previous studies led by Joe Allen at Harvard about how carbon dioxide buildup affects cognition, human cognition. And within the ASHRAE standards, ASHRAE is the American Society of Heating, Refrigerating, and Air Conditioning Engineers, which sets the standard for ventilation design. Even within that, you can see in the figure on the right how cognition decreases by 50%. And a lot of this buildup happens in work environments when you're sitting in front of a computer screen. Um, the work done by Esther in partnership with the GSA has shown that there's big carbon dioxide bubbles around you when you sit in front of the screen for long hours, and that largely decreases cognition. Another way of understanding is how quickly you fall asleep in airplanes sometimes, where there's quick buildup of carbon dioxide, or on long road trips, where there's small cabins, enclosed cabins of many people exhaling carbon dioxide, and that's building up. That's impacting your cognition in different ways and putting you to sleep. So we have studied workplace environments already to a large extent, but there haven't been many studies on carbon dioxide buildup and sleeping. So we are currently studying that in the University of Arizona Sleep Center, which is run by Dr. Usai Parthasarthi in the College of Medicine, an expert on sleep and circadian sciences. And our institute, Dr. Sternberg, Sung Young Jun in systems and industrial engineering, and Jacob Hyde in psychology. And there's two studies that are funded by CAPLA Research Seed Grant Initiatives. The first one is for normal adults aged 18 to 65, funded by a CAPLA Grassroots Research Seed Grant. The other one is for older adults, funded by a seed grant that came out of Building a Changing World workshop that Associate Dean Barbara Bryson organizes on a regular basis. And these have led to a larger study funded by the state of Arizona for wearable devices that is currently underway. There are some snapshots of the current sleep center, but that is going to be renovated, redesigned and renovated very soon, and funded by an NIH grant led by Dr. Parthasarthi. But it's fascinating, really, even going into the sleep center and looking at it and looking at the different devices and the ways they measure sleep and how they black out the lights and keep an individual there from ranging from 2 days to a week, just staying there and measuring different aspects of human physiology and environmental measures. And then student work, again, has been very related to the work on Indo Air Quality that we do. So another student of HPE, of the HPE program that graduated recently, Gaida Halabib, presented her work recently, end of last year, at the Indo Air 2020 conference. And she used a physical modeling technique and working with Dr. Alithia Ida, whose lab has developed this innovative hydrogel membrane. She used that in windows, so they effectively acted as filters for the outside air, and a combination of plants. And again, we know that plants purify air, but there are different types of plants depending on the Kelvin cycle. So, and this was a big learning experience for me, looking at GAIDA, read the literature on different types of plants and which ones are most effective in filtering air pollution. And turns out a lot of our desert plants in Tucson are very effective in filtering out bad pollutants from the air, and used in combination with the hydrogels, they are very effective in mitigating the indoor air pollution. So I thought it was a great finding for a smaller scale master's project, which led to a really good presentation at the Indo Air conference. So this is the most current project that we are undertaking as a team, called Dash Safe, which stands for Dashboard Stress at Risk Facilities Environment. Last year, as COVID broke out and um, there was increasing cause for concern, there were also many research opportunities, and we got quite busy in the summer, sending out lots of proposals for these opportunities. And this project was an outcome for one of those proposals, when RI at UA put out a call for, again, internal funding for COVID-19 related projects. So Dash Safe is a personal risk assessment, risk management, navigation, and automated tool. Um, it's led by Dr. Sternberg, and I'll show you all the team names in a couple of slides, but led by Dr. Esther Sternberg, Boyang from Kapla, Shurjen Lee, Youngjun Sun from engineering, systems and industrial engineering, myself, Philip Stoker from Kapla, and Matthias Mail from psychology. So again, it was great to see that um, the built environment and Kapla could occupy such an important space in the COVID-19 ongoing research at the UA. So we see a lot of public health upfront and medicine upfront, but our collaboration really gives us an important place in this research. And you'll see when you go to the website of RI, you'll see probably 9 different teams up there, and we are one of those 9 teams. But we do work together a lot, and there's, again, collaboration between the teams, so that we are not replicating work, we are working very efficiently, and in the end, helping the university as a whole, right? Also, this project was a lot of learning on the subjective side of things. So we had a lot of expertise on the objective side of things, but we also combined perceptions and experiences of people and brought in the subjective data into this project. And here are all the names again of the core team. Uh, we meet every week. There's lots of um, presentations to different potential collaborators, industry partners, um, and organizations almost every 1 or 2 weeks. So it's very exciting. It's also fast moving. It's taken a lot of different turns and changes over its course. But other than the core team, there's a number of units and collaborators over the UA that have helped us and who are listed here. So you see data science, nursing. I'll give a call up to Rebecca Blackenston, who's the user experience strategist at UA Libraries, and she's helping us run the pilot program, a pilot program that's a part of this study at the UA Libraries right now. And there's behavioral, social and behavioral sciences, and there's RI. And also not listed here is the FM lead, facilities and management lead for this project, Michael Hoffman, who was a key collaborator for us. And we are working very closely with facilities and management for this project. The value lies in future COVID applications for crowdsourced safety, variety of risk, and using in many geographic locations. So this is not a COVID tracing app or a COVID tracing kind of invention, but it's really documentation of people's emotional responses in a visual and spatial manner to different spaces across the campus. Dash Safe will allow View Arizona FM to more effectively and immediately alert leadership of potential risk areas that need to be addressed and mitigated in different ways. And over the long term, we hope that we can proactively monitor, predict, and manage potential issues related to occupancy and risk. So there may be other pandemics, there may be other problems, and we believe that the dashboard is flexible enough to adapt and help at different times whenever that happens. So there are two versions in development. One is the facilities management tool, and the other one is a general campus occupant tool. And the facilities management customization, actually the launch happened this month, not in January, but there was a bit of a delay in with facilities being extremely busy in setting up the COVID vaccination pods across the campus. But I believe it was finally launched yesterday. We had a soft launch, and facilities is actively starting to use this tool. The dashboard has many layers. So the observed CDC guidelines, which call for face coverings and social distancing, observation of risk, building design and systems and operations risk score. We hope that other health applications, such as findings from the wastewater viral load, will ultimately be connected to the same dashboard. And then finally, the predictive modeling done by Dr. Sun-Young Jung's lab in engineering, which helps in predicting risk and safety in different areas across campus and creates a navigation tool like Waze or other crowdsourced applications that tell you where to walk through safely or how to get there safely. And then finally, an alert function that goes straight to facilities and management, and the incident command system, ICS, when there's a perception of risk in certain areas and a high concentration of risk. And it has to go through the IRB, and the final layer of this is also linking to the Pima County numbers for COVID infections. So that gives users the information. Here is an example from a laptop screen as well as a phone on the right side that shows you real-time results of risk and safety. So the red is unsafe, green is safe, and in the middle, the yellow is neutral. And when you see those dots, you immediately know the risky areas on campus, the safe areas on campus. So that gives you an idea of where you could avoid risk, or how you could navigate safely through those areas. And then finally, the perception of stress. So you'll see on the lower right over here a question about how the dashboard, whether the dashboard helps to reduce stress, and then 5 ratings on that. So users can rate it after they complete the survey of the dashboard. And there's really straightforward 5 questions inside the survey, and they're related to the location of the space, indoor, outdoor, observations of physical distancing, observations of face coverings, and then again, that ties to the CDC guidelines, and then how people, the perception of stress, experience of stress based on these observations. And then if people get to identify their location, these findings are tied back to the map that I showed you earlier. And that's the cell phone interface. I believe Bo and Shojen are in this talk, in this meeting, and they usually present a video that shows you how to navigate the survey on your phone when you see that, because we believe most users will be using this on their phone. Dr. Matthias Malin's psychology helped us to develop the event contingent survey. So it's a survey that's based on the identification of safe and unsafe events by mostly facilities at this time, but probably also security guards and custodial staff in the future. And just to emphasize, no personal information is collected, no identifying information is collected from facilities personnel or anyone else taking the survey. And then there's an evaluation of the effectiveness and how well it works independently through other collaborators. And then the location contingent part right now is being tested by the help of Rebecca Blackiston at the UL Libraries. We developed a poster that people could read the barcode off of their phones and then take the survey. And we have student reps at the libraries, such as America Darling Cole, who helped us largely in developing the survey as well as the posters and putting them across the library. There was also a user experience survey done for this survey. So there was essentially a survey for the survey to determine how well this works and how's the user experience of using this tool. So, and it was put near entry exit doors, near elevators, different parts of the library, and it has been very successful so far in gathering a lot of responses, as well as feedback about the user experience of this tool. And then is the layer for the building design systems and operations, in which we developed a new scoring method based on occupancy and air exchange. Now, earlier for the campus-wide study, we had identified a number of categories. We selected 9 buildings across campus that are very different in their function and the age. And we identified a number of categories based on the scientific COVID literature that keeps being developed and that's fast emerging and also changing very often, as well as guidelines that come from GSA, WELL, ASHRAE, and other organizations. So we initially developed a scoring method, but facilities and management said that they preferred a scoring method that was based on actual occupant density and air exchange rates. And that's because it's based on things that they could actually do and control and have effective interventions on. So just going back to the scientific literature a little bit, air exchange rate is very effective in reducing infections, and studies have shown that. So Quanta is a unit that measures viral aerosols needed to affect a susceptible person, and different activities produce different quantities of Quanta. So based on that, you may have heard that bars and gyms were one of the first places to be locked down when COVID came down, but maybe not in Arizona, but in many states. So, and you can see why, right? Sitting and loudly speaking or standing and loudly speaking in bars gives off high levels of Quanta, or exercise also gives off very high levels. So they were shown to significantly drop the moment you change the supply air flow rate to 3 and then keep increasing. And then you can see after 6, it's almost level after that, the infection rates. So there's a big effort by facilities to change the air exchange rates to be 6 and above for all campus buildings. Similarly, for studies on air filtration have shown that more filters, so HEPA filters are considered the gold standard for controlling infections, largely used in hospitals, but studies on more filters have shown them to be also highly effective, because HEPA filters come with certain limitations. They're not compatible with existing systems. They consume a lot of energy required to blow air through the filters, as well as other considerations. So studies have shown MERV 13 and above to be almost as effective, again, in controlling infections. And facilities is going ahead, and I believe they've already actually changed all the air filters to MERV 14 and above in our campus buildings. But none of them, none of the design interventions can compete with a human sneeze, right? The human sneeze reaches 25 feet. And that's why the questions on masking and social distancing in the dashboard are so important and key to understanding perceptions of risk and safety. So you can do all those interventions. None of them are as effective as social and behavioral issues related to masking and other social guidelines. we already see a decrease in flu activity during the COVID pandemic. And if you're so inclined to read the CDC weekly report on morbidity and mortality, you will see this is one of the latest pieces on there. And that's believed to be because of the widespread adoption of these mitigation measures related to physical distancing and masking. And then lastly is the Pima County dashboard that gives, again, the latest information on infections, which we also believe is valuable in perceiving risk and safety at the UA. And then expected outcomes are stress reduction, risk mitigation, navigating the campus safely, decreasing the viral transmission, returning campus life back to normal. And then the applications could be like I mentioned earlier, Waze or Yelp for safety, or creating a Yelp for comfort, and connecting Dash Safe to automated building systems in the future. So facilities is also very interested in optimizing energy use, right? So changing out air filters also impacts energy, or many of these interventions also impacts energy use. So for them, the information on energy is very valuable. And if that can be linked and automated in different ways, that would be ideal as far as facilities is concerned. So our next steps for this project are commercialization through UA Tech Launch. So it's licensed through Tech Launch. We have a patent in progress. We look out for industry partnerships all the time. We had a major presentation to a potential partner this morning. So I'm essentially looking at the slides again. So the campus project, library pilot, and UA facilities project is going to reveal great information. And we'd like to study the results and learn from the outcomes. And then grants in progress to NIH that we applied for recently and didn't receive, but there are many other upcoming opportunities from NIH, NSF, and CDC that we're closely looking at. So I'll end this talk on a personal note. Like Laura mentioned, I'm originally from India, from the city of Mumbai, which has a population of about 23 million. That's actually eclipsed by New Delhi, which has a population of 28 million. But more than half the people in Mumbai live in slums, such as these seen in this image. And the middle class and where I grew up in a building, such as these right next to slums. So it's hard to live there and not, be part of the slums in a certain way and the way people live, and be part of that density in different ways. So the interventions that we look at over here in the US and Europe don't really work always. The physical distancing doesn't work. The masking may work, but requires a lot of education. If you say wash your hands all the time, well, they don't have access to clean water to wash their hands always. So, and therein lies the challenge of, I think, a very developing more of a global perspective and implementing health and built environment measures in different ways across the world. Pandemics don't know any boundaries, and they're easily transmitted across the globe, as we recently saw. So we need to keep working towards developing a very global, interdisciplinary outlook in the field, and keep exploring synergies between research, education, and practice. Thank you. So I believe we are opening up for Q&A.
Yeah, thank
Happy
you.
to take any questions. Yeah.
That was really extraordinary and gave me certainly, and I would assume my colleagues and other students, just amazing insight into the scope of your research. Just a first reflection, Yeah, I'm just really impressed at the, thinking about research impact and rhizomatic connections, that you've done an extraordinary job making connections across campus. And I would even say there are other connections I can think that might make sense, particularly in relation to this last slide that you shared around the human rights issues, public health, economic, social, and equity issues. There are a number of people who are really focusing on that in yet other schools, not in the sciences, but in social sciences and humanities. So I can share some context with you afterwards. Do we have any questions or comments, reflections from students and faculty?
I see Rob's in the hand.
Yeah, Rob, and then Esther. Rob, first to you.
Hi, Altaf. Great talk, and really wonderful to see all that put in perspective. I want to ask you a question about Dash Safe that on one hand is practical and the other, I think, also philosophical. The practical side of it is this. In the Dash Safe protocol, you have a wastewater test, and I presume that's the test, for example, in the effluent from dorms that can pick up a trace of COVID. So we don't have to test 200 people individually. We can see if there's one in this group, and then we can go dig it out. So why, from the practical point of view, is there not an air quality test in places like Kapla where we could sample and check air quality in a similar way? So that's the practical side. The philosophical side that would be interesting for you to address is this. Over the last year, as the reentry team and the faculty and everybody in the Kaplan community has been looking at how the building's designed and patterns of airflow, it's been a total revelation about where air moves and the implications of that, particularly in Kaplan East, where we have on those studio floors, we have one big return air funnel in the middle of the floor, so that people sitting near that return air path would get the entire return air moving by them. So there's a philosophical question about design and air quality and what we need to learn from this. And then there's a practical question about your Dash Safe protocol and what's in it and what's not in it and what might be happening. Great talk. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Rob. Yeah, these are both great observations. The first one related to air quality, we do want to do that. And you may see that happen very soon in a partnership with facilities and management, because Michael Hoffman, whom we're working with, has expressed a lot of interest in monitoring these building systems in different ways. So air quality, but also energy usage. He wants to develop a dashboard for energy usage also. So his vision is really linking Dash Safe or using the information from Dash Safe in a certain way to develop that energy dashboard that we can all log in and look at in real time for our campus buildings. So we may see that happen in the coming years. The second one, about the return air, I did hear that conversation in previous meetings. And that's always interesting because I don't think, that's unique only to Kapla. I think a lot of the campus buildings have similar conditions. And I guess I'll answer the philosophical questions in a very practical way, just by saying that, FM cannot, there's limitations on what they can and cannot do. But again, when they come up with interventions such as changing out the air filters and increasing the air exchange rates, that can have a big impact in conditions such as that. But in addition to that, that's why I think the tool studies occupancy, maximum occupancy, unsafe conditions, perceptions of risk, to add to that level of information as to what we can do to mitigate unsafe conditions. I guess Rob just disappeared. He probably didn't like my answers very much. I don't know.
He's there.
Well, I think Esther's jumping at the bit to ask the next question.
Yeah.
So let's,
No, I want to congratulate Altaf. Really beautiful talk, and the scope of what you're doing, going from glare and lighting in museums. And I love the plant study. We'll have to talk about that offline when there aren't all these people here, but you must share that with me. It's been a real pleasure and a joy to collaborate with Altaf through the Institute on Place, Wellbeing, and Performance, and to collaborate with the whole team here. Altaf mentioned all the team from CAPLA. We have four CAPLA faculty on the Dash Safe team, and we had two grad research assistants, Austin Young and Gabby Spickard, who were terrific on this. And Shujin Lee has really been doing yeoman's work on the GIS dashboard. But the feedback we get every time we pitch this to potential funders, especially this morning, is that what a great team. You are all so enthusiastic and passionate and knowledgeable about each of your areas of expertise. And so Altaf has been leading the building side of it, and the questions you asked, Rob, are very important. The building function, the building systems are critical, and as critical to the frontline work that the medical profession is doing with the virus and the disease and the intensive care units and the vaccine and all that is the built environment. And it's been a real joy to again work with Altaf, with all of the CAPLA faculty, Bo and Shujin and Philip Stoker, and to partner with the leadership at CAPLA, Nancy Pollock-Elwand and Barbara Bryson, Robert Miller. This is unique. There are no other universities that have this degree of interdisciplinary close collaboration between the College of Architecture and the design professions and the medical colleges. And you look at any of them across the country, the collaborations are more in public health and urban planning level, which is important. But we are really unique and positioned to lead the country at a very critical time when prevention comes from designing the built environment. And just one other point with what Rob brought up, the goal with this dashboard is to keep adding layers. We will keep adding as many layers as are needed. And I want to make one last point. We did file a patent. Our tech launch patent officer has asked me to emphasize that this is confidential. We please do not take screenshots and distribute them anywhere. And I have just received an email from our tech launch officer to be sure that everybody knows this. So, but thank you again, Altaf, for a really great talk and a wonderful partnership and collaboration.
Thank you so much, Esther. It's been a pleasure collaborating with you and the rest of our team. So thanks for the kind words.
Laura, to you.
Yeah, thank you, Beth. Well, I echo what my colleagues have said about the range of the research. It's really remarkably impressive and a very clear presentation. So I have a sort of a theoretical question, and it may be a very naive one, but I'm going to ask it anyway. So we talk about design for health and well-being. The health part, I think we all have a handle on, right? And we have a sense of how to measure it. In fact, in the middle of your talk, I got the results from a metabolic panel that was done from blood that was drawn from me yesterday, and it's all laid out there, all the numbers, for better and worse. But I'm curious whether in your field there really is a consensus about the definition of well-being. What are the components of that? How are they measured? That's it strikes me as, a sort of a more difficult thing. And I'm curious just to hear from you, whether there is consensus on how to define that and, what the what the subparts are.
Great question, Laura. So I don't think there's a blanket definition of that in my experience of well-being. And I believe it should be a very customized approach to individual differences and individual health outcomes. But we do know a lot of the core principles of well-being that have been proven by scientific research, right? That we publish, that others in the field publish, and that should definitely become the norm, I feel, for well-being.
Mhm.
So, and a lot of the principles of the that come out from the Center for Integrative Medicine, I think, speak to that. And there's a new building being designed on the basis of a lot of those principles, and that will implement a lot of those measures. So I think you will definitely see well-being outcomes, but there will be individual differences. And once again, that's why going back to Dash Safe, the surveys, the subjective information, individual responses, and what people say is really, really important to know.
Mhm. Okay, thank you.
And Anthony has his hand up next, and then we'll go to Nancy.
Thank you, Beth. Altaf, this was wonderful. I was curious if you had partnered with any housing, university housing, or those towers on Speedway and Euclid to study students there and to see if there are architectural responses that you can be doing in a short term or a long term in response to what's been happening.
Yeah, so the survey information will come also from students living in those spaces. But of course, we don't have access to those. Many of them are privately run and owned, and facilities has no control over that. So we wouldn't be able to get the objective part of that at least. But having said that, with the industry partnerships, we want to customize the dashboard and come up with these collaborations to study these kind of spaces, right? Because sometimes these are where the infections happen the most, right? The dorm parties and the other ones and gatherings. So those are pretty important to study. So you raise a good point.
Nancy, you had a question. You have to unmute. Here you go.
It's Friday afternoon. I've been told that all week. First, I just want to comment is that, just echo what Esther's been saying, that, in coming actually to CAPLA, this was one of the things that drew me actually to the University of Arizona in particular, knowing about this interdisciplinary, academic units and different experts coming together in terms of the built environment. And it reminds me that the power of the built environment to draw people together, doesn't matter if you're an expert through to someone who is a citizen. It's got all sorts of ranges of connection, obviously. But then, think about what we are doing around health, around equity, around the notion of cultural vibrancy and resilience. There's so many areas for the built environment that we would approach in a similar way. And so this is not only a model for how to approach wellness, but it's also on all of these other areas, a model for us to think about how we approach these complex issues. But you asked a question about wellness, and Esther, that was, we've had some wonderful conversations about all the wearables and the research that's occurring. I know that Altaf talked about that, but I think the wearables and the work that you're doing is part of this wellness very much, because of course you're associated with the Andrew Weil and all of the work that's happening from that side of the house in the university. But I was just wondering, when you it's like Star Trek or when you talk to you about the research, I'm dating myself by using Star Trek, but you know, something like that. In terms of these wearables, I mean, it's extraordinary how fast the technologies and how it's assisting us in terms of the built form. It's incredible.
Yeah. If I could comment, I don't want to take away from Altaf's discussion here, but I just put in the chat, the Andrew Weil Center for Integrative Medicine launched an app called My Wellness Coach. It was launched in February of last year, just before COVID hit. And it just took off because it helps walk you through the 7 domains of integrative health, which are sleep, nutrition, spirituality, resilience, which is stress and relaxation response, the physical environment, biophilia, social interactions. And you can choose whichever area of, I'm giving a little pitch here, but it's free, so we're not making any money out of it. You can choose whichever area you feel you want to work on, and it walks you through how to work on these different areas. And people seem to be sticking to it, especially during the pandemic. There's a huge amount of stress. I mean, everybody is stressed. You're grieving, you have social isolation, you're losing your job and the financial stresses. I mean, there's massive stress, and we are positioned, we can't get rid of the pandemic, we can't get rid of the virus, but we can do something in our own physical environment to even reduce a little bit of that stress. And so, yeah, I think that we as a team here, and certainly the Andrew Weil Center for Integrative Medicine, has a lot to offer to help people not only cope but thrive through this crisis. So thank you, Nancy. Yeah,
great comments, Nancy and Esther. I'll just add to that by saying it's not easy from an architect's perspective. It's not easy connecting the principles of integrative medicine to built environment outcomes. I mean, for example, spirituality, how do you connect that to like a room? Or, how do you connect nutrition to a building and, have a design outcome that enhances nutrition? And these are some things that we discuss and talk about, and my understanding of the subject has greatly increased. So I'll give one example of nutrition. Andy Weil has these great teaching kitchens, I believe. And Esther, you can correct me if that's not true, but I believe he has great teaching kitchens in which he educates people about the environment. And in the new building, the teaching kitchen has to be designed in a specific way to be very effective. So, I mean, that's a good example of how you could connect, nutritional benefits to actual design of the built environment.
I think that sounds like that was an amazing point to wrap up this amazingly informative and inspiring talk. So why don't we end it there? Thank you, Altaf, so much for your talk and for sharing your research with us. And now that we know all the many things that you're involved with, we'll all want to come and participate in your various projects. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Beth. I welcome all collaborations and participation, but thanks for this opportunity to present my work today and just be with all of you. And thank you all for attending this Friday evening, end of the week. So